This was the operational map at the start of the tactical battles, and this was after turn 1. Start and after turn 1. The key points will shape our strategy going forward. The two key points, one north of Stepanovka and one to the west, look the most vulnerable, and we have 3 others within Soviet reach. As we are only 2 hours into this battle, it would be premature to give up on the idea of containing this breakthrough and hoping that we can hold on until reinforcements arrive down the track. So our infantry, artillery, anti-tank gun force has to try and find a way of slowing down at least this T-34 led advance. Damaged or vulnerable units can be identified by the red disc. If we right click on the unit, we can go to the casualties and captures and examine what happened to this particular unit. Note that the unit icon will also be coloured red. So these are his medals and the various casualties that they sustained. By clicking this button here, we see the forces list and we can see its makeup. We see why it's red. Its experience is down to 16%. Now this chap belonging to the 581st, by seeing the 58 up here we can tell this guy is actually his superior unit. And notice that this chap has the blue box around him to confirm that relationship, and also that unit supplies this unit here, plus this one, and all these units here with the blue box around them. So I think at this stage it makes sense to think about moving this unit back towards his supplying unit. So we click him there, but before we move him we should think about who's going to replace him, because he's right next to the key point or on the key point, so we'll need to think about moving one of these units in there later on. So there seems to be enough units around that can take his place, so we're free to move him out. So we'll move him up to there with a right click, and then he's only 2 squares away from that headquarters unit, so he can get resupplied. Interestingly, we have these reconnaissance units which can be very helpful. You'll see they have the circular armour symbol, but they have these small wheels and the slash going through them, and that means they're reconnaissance units. Now you may recall around here in Stepanovka we had that T-34 surge. Now it's pointless running these reconnaissance units against T-34s, but they can be very handy against infantry units, so I'll be looking to shuffle them around the flank here somehow, so hopefully they can get into the infantry units. And my basic strategy is, when going through and reshuffling our forces, is to look to attack in behind and go for his artillery units, his reconnaissance units, infantry, etc., with our units that can perhaps do him some damage. At the same time, looking for the infantry units with the anti-tank guns, engineers and these sorts of units that I can try and put in the way of this T-34 onslaught. It'll be interesting to see which way he goes from here, whether he keeps charging towards this way through the key points, or whether he gets diverted up to here, this key point here, although he does have 2 infantry companies and another infantry platoon there, so you may have enough, he thinks, to go through us just there. So we'll just have to see. Obviously we need to consider our wounded units down south and how we're going to reinforce them. Currently in this turn we have some reinforcements coming later in the turn, but all the units at the side of the map at the moment are all supply units. An interesting point about supply is this unit here, which is the 306th Infantry Division. These green boxes here indicate these units are supplied at 100%. The yellow with the blue boxes at 75%, and then it reduces down to red like this one here. But also notice he has a transport unit. Now the transport unit extends the range of 100% supply, so that is extremely useful. And in fact, this unit down here is still red, but anyway, so these guys here, they can get 100%, and out the percentage goes as the further away they get. But you can see how important supply units are in the overall picture. So I'll go ahead now and move my other damage units and form hopefully some sort of workable strategy to slow down this Soviet breakthrough, and I'll get back to you after that. While completing the turn on the operational map, it was pretty obvious the cupboard was fairly bare, but we'll soldier on and see how we go. Well, as you can see by the operational map for turn 2 battle 1, the T-34 force has decided to continue pushing west against our force. So there's the two what we think are T-34 platoons, an infantry platoon and a company commander and his platoon attacking our force there on the western side. Once again we have an infantry dominated force supported by artillery, the recon units which I discussed previously, and two new units, a heavy anti-tank battery, and in the south a light or medium tank destroyer battery. Also, if you look closely at the map, you'll see we also have a infantry battalion commander or regimental commander, so we probably will have some type of off-map artillery. The tactical briefing map, as you can see by these blue arrows, this indicates that some units have just arrived on the battle space, so we cannot move them during the deployment phase. That's this unit here. MG42 unit. This unit down here. Teichmann with the anti-tank guns. Unfortunately, I would have liked to have positioned him. Another infantry platoon down here. Lawfeld. And our Marder force, which also has the artillery spotter for the off-map artillery. A very interesting observation about some of these reconnaissance units. Some of them have vehicles and some of them are foot reconnaissance units. So quite an interesting mix. So if we go around the map, we'll start with the 1 Recon Battalion Commander. So I have him here on top of this hill. He is with the 1st company of the Recons, and they have the SPW 251s and the more standard 232 reconnaissance vehicles, which are the wheel ones. Sort of quite good vehicles. So I have one lot of vehicles here in the middle. I plan to sneak down there and just have a look. Second lot of recon vehicles belongs to Kaiser. So I'm hoping with these guys we can just keep our eyes on this flank and perhaps look to advance into Stepanovka East. We'll just have to play that by ear. The martyrs, fortunately, if you can see this ridge line, are on the reverse slope, so there's no line of sight to them anywhere on the map, so no matter where the T-34s roll up, they won't be spotted, so that's a plus for us. These guys here who've just arrived, look like they might be right in the space of the T-34s, and they're only a mortar unit, I believe. Yes, a mortar and MG42 units, so they might be scampering for this bush area early. We'll just have to see how they go. Tesh, he has a Pack 9738, which I've aligned with the road here, so, and the rest of them are just around to protect him. Spangle is another reconnaissance, a foot-based reconnaissance unit, so I'm planning to sort of push him through these houses if we get the chance, we don't get overrun. Good Friday is another infantry unit, once again keeping an eye on Stepanovka West, but note that we can't lose this square in the battle because it's black, but he in turn is protecting the guns here in the middle. Well, that's supposed to be his role initially. We have our anti-tank guns up here at the back, not in a too bad a position because they do overlook Stepanovka, but we may need to move them during the battle. Cutler is another infantry company, which is just on the reverse slopes. Once again, he won't be able to be spotted by anyone early in the battle, so we'll have him there as a reserve. Our machine gun company is here, and another foot-based reconnaissance unit there, which will push through this scrub and see if we can spot these guys. As you can see, there's another one of these long arrows which I misinterpreted last time. Well, you'd have to think there's some units moving that way, wouldn't you? But we'll just have to push these guys into these green areas, see if we can get eyes on anything moving, particularly over this bridge. And we have looks like a major attack going from east to west. That's top of the map now is north. So some very interesting happenings at the start of this battle. The first thing we need to do is to find our forward observer and do our, so right click to go to the spotter. Okay, so there's Koenig, here's our spotter. So this is all scheduled support, so it means we have to settle our battles before hitting start the game. So right click, I'm going to do a, rather than a incendiary, I might do a flare mission first. As I've discussed previously, this should be the rough deployment area, so we'll rip out a few flares over this area here. Flares 200, we've got 200 flares all up. Alright, so if we do 5 per gun, that would be 20 flares. I guess that's enough, so we'll do that. So then we register it, which is the big difference between off-map and on-map, is you have to register the mission. Then it goes for those blue lines. So what we'll do next, we might continue with our flare theme. Right mouse button. We'll have a look at Stepanovka East. Hopefully our recon units will be able to get a look. Put him there, 2 minutes. Once again, yeah, that sounds pretty good. So we'll just register him. And we'll whack out another lot of flares over Oops. Need to right click in there. And which, so we're doing 5 by 4 is 20. Well, let's whip in some more. Maybe we should make them bigger. So that's 40. Yeah, okay, we'll do that. Register. So the little reconnaissance vehicle and had some follow-up infantry, so they did cause me some aggravation. Now you can see we're putting 10 missions and it's told us we can't do any more missions, so that's it. The Marder 3 tank destroyers are our main weapons against the T-34. We have two types, the first being the Type 131 with the 7.5cm Pak 40 L48 main gun. It's good with the APCR round out to 1150 and with the standard APC round out to 770. The other Marder we have is the version 139, which has a 76.2 Pak 36 RL51, which is good out to 1100 metres with the APCR and 500 with the APC round against the front of the T-34. Also note that the 139 also has a bow-mounted machine gun, obviously useful against infantry. This was the scene of the battle early. On the far right, my reconnaissance units were moving towards Stepanovka East. My recon units in the south were heading north along the road, and they were met by a Soviet armoured car. And also they spotted where those black crosses were a number of T-34s. This later in the battle forced my recon units there on the right to make a U-turn and look for an area out of the line of fire of the T-34s, which I didn't. But this allowed my Marder force, which eventually I got my far left of the map, Marders to the left into town. And my plan was to have an engagement in town, and they were able to get nice arcs on the T-34s as they were assaulting the infantry in there. So that was a fortunate happening. You can see the unit highlights of all the T-34s there on the horizon as they were chasing my reconnaissance units over here on the far right. So this enabled my martyrs to travel at a high speed with their lights on to get into town. But as usual, the battle didn't quite happen as I envisaged it, but I thought this was a good move, trying to push them into town and use the roads as fire lanes. This is the T-34s chasing after my recce unit. I mean, all you can really do at this stage is turn your units around and just try and get them out of line of sight. As you can see up there, there's probably what, 7 or 8 T-34s chasing after them, so it was a good diversion as far as it goes, to get my martyrs into that western part of town. So this is looking from the west to the east, seeing my recce units on the far side. Also, I was trying to get in some of the infantry just to patrol through the gullies and things and try and get eyes on the Soviet forces. At this stage, the T-34s were returning from the east, chasing after my recon units, and were moving to a more central position on the map where they were identifying that infantry platoon in the woods on the right hand side there. At this stage I was still really moving my martyrs cautiously into the streets of Stepanovka, but the battle sort of progressed pretty quick on me from this point here, and as I mentioned earlier, that infantry unit was the prime mover because that attracted the attention of the T-34s and allowed some of my martyrs to get into reasonably good firing positions. Here is a good example of positioning of anti-tank guns, martyrs, or even machine guns. Positioning him along the length of the road allows him to use his range and dominate that part of the road. So these are the sort of move you should be looking for when you're positioning machine guns or tanks. Nice fire lanes for them, and particularly if they've got good protection from the flanks from visual sight or line of fire of other units. main engagement was about to start at this stage, but I think before I show you all that, we'll have a quick discussion on silhouette, which is, I made this little vision up on the during the deployment phase. You can see the vehicle in position A is where my vehicles were when the battle started. The green vehicle up here is actually vehicle B. Now just note where the gunner of vehicle A can see vehicle B, it's pretty clear silhouette against the horizon, so you can imagine the spotting values of the various algorithms would be much higher for a hit for vehicle A shooting at B rather than vehicle B looking down towards that silver icon trying to discern where that vehicle is. So this is something really important to try and think about when you're placing your vehicles, and in fact if you go back to the deployment map, you'll see where the martyrs were initially positioned. If they just popped over that ridge and then engaged the T-34s, they would have been perfectly silhouetted against the horizon, so the situation would have been the reverse. Whereas by moving into town and then shooting towards the south, the martyrs had the advantage of having the cluttered silhouette, and the T-34s would have been a much easier silhouette for the martyr gunners to shoot at. So that's just something you might want to consider moving forward. I thought this one was probably the best example of a good line of fire. He can see out in a nice sort of wedge formation, and you can see at his left front and right front he has protection from line of sight coming in. So any enemy vehicles that wander into his line of fire You know, they're just not going to see him get away the first couple of shots. So if you keep putting your vehicles in those types of positions, eventually you'll get a payoff. So the battle continued in this sort of rather confused state for quite some time, and I was running a bit short of time, so I actually accepted the AI's offer of surrender, which was probably a bit silly, which is another thing about these games. I think you really have to be willing to just sit down and relax and give them the time that they really deserve. So my credibility as a Mius Front commentator is sort of waning with another total defeat. But it was all very interesting, and I hope you got some interesting points out of this tutorial. So hopefully next time I'll see the battle through to the end, and I'll see if I can get something better than a total defeat.